다 다자 먼저 좀 첩식으로 다는데 다자 다다 뭐 망조 가는 로가야지 단 점니 군세리 점니 참을로 다 첨비 미지 네베 차로도 여다 유지리디 이내 강다 망조 타는 로대야지 다 약수 차되기 하리 자 드네 뭐 인도잖아요 아주 배가 있니 점니 찌도 첨비지 랑가 로가야지 샤케치 모리
His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama began planning for a future democratic Tibet years before the Chinese invasion. By the mid-1950s, he had established a number of committees to implement a series of land, tax, and other political reforms. He found inspiration during his first visit to one of the world's youngest democracies, India.
nga tumi che ke mari di ine ga zhe da wa qin che ji tong bu le so da ngo na zhe ne ge rang wang dam ju rang wang ji mang zu shi de ke zhe ji ge ga su le ge zhen yu de ba de qi se nang se che tu ya de ya de mo sa ji ya ru chu.
But before the young Dalai Lama could bring his vision of a democratic Tibet to fruition, China's of his country forced him to seek refuge in exile in the March of 1959. The government of India generously opened its doors to him and the 80,000 Tibetans who spilled over the Himalayan passes fleeing persecution. His Holiness the Dalai Lama faced the daunting task of being responsible for the welfare of this huge refugee population and to find ways to provide them with education, housing, and employment while working to preserve the profound and ancient Tibetan Buddhist culture that was being systematically destroyed in Tibet. However, his vision of a Tibetan democracy was never far from his mind. Less than a year after he left Tibet, the 25-year-old leader made his first public announcement of his plans to democratize the Tibetan government. In the year 1960, Tibet's first elected body, the Commission of Tibetan People's Deputies, took their oath of office on September 2nd, a date that is celebrated every year as the Tibetan Democracy Day. On March 10, 1963, the fourth anniversary of the Tibetan People's Uprising, the fledgling Tibetan government finalized a charter that became Tibet's first constitution. The charter is based on the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, guaranteeing equality before the law and freedom of expression, assembly, and religion. But along with the modern norms of democracy, the Central Tibetan Administration has incorporated an article that is unique among modern political constitutions: that Tibetan polity shall be based upon the principle of non-violence. His Holiness the Dalai Lama has always initiated and occasionally found the need to encourage the Tibetan community to take up democratic principles.
Gegi godu da ina da gyar muchigi da pa genro be zokia di pa shaje da mangzo di chigugi sagi samju yongya di dosi manguji ya lori ya mochuri suru chin godu di neru chumbure da di paji chugju riji ri dwane 아주 마음에 쩌림 신지지 söje 디닝두지 패지 주주 리숨로 이미 마사라 제베리 디나라 겨울무시고 왕저디 아니 그게 계시는 그게 거바로 충분히나 아니 겨울무시 왕저디 두주 단 거야 사지 계시 다 드든 거 쪼래 들이다자
In the first 30 years of exile, the road to democracy was rather slow. All the ministers of the cabinet were still appointed by His Holiness, and there was little financial accountability to the parliament. In the year 1990, His Holiness the Dalai Lama expanded the number of parliamentary members. He gave them independent authority to appoint members of the cabinet and increased their power of legislation, policy making, and financial control. He also sought to give women a greater voice in the government. The establishment of elected local assemblies helped to strengthen democracy at the grassroots level and allowed for the democratic participation of all Tibetans. In the year 2001, His Holiness requested the Parliament to revise the Charter and provide for Tibet's first public election of the Chief Cabinet Minister, equivalent to a Prime Minister. The exiled Tibetans from the 55 settlements in India, Nepal, and Bhutan, as well as those who had immigrated to countries as far-flung as Australia, America, and Norway, voted on their choice of candidates. It was a daunting task for the Election Commission to oversee a free and fair elections of a people who are scattered all over the world. On the 20th of August 2001, the Election Commissioner announced that Professor Samdong Rinpoche would serve as Tibet's first elected Chief Cabinet Minister. Tibet has now taken its place alongside the democracies of the modern world. The Central Tibetan administration consists of three bodies: the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. The Tibetan Parliament is the legislative body representing Tibetans both inside and outside Tibet. The Kashak or cabinet consists of 8 ministers, including the directly elected Prime Minister or Kalun Tripa, is responsible for 7 administrative departments: Department of Religion and Culture, Department of Home, Department of Finance, Department of Education, Department of Security, Department of Information and International Relations, and Department of Health.
단 행아 메더 만조치 추리레고 나시레고 시리레고 벤조레고 아니 대선레고 단 최대레고 스토셰제 치리레고 시도 시니 가다 뜻 행아 듀인체베 칼렌저리 신 도시니 시경그 밍드 아니 저저기 메트나니 야면은 가고나와인 담토고요 말에 아니 가고 중앙에는 의로고요 가고만 중앙에는 지명 담도고요 지금 대체제 담니 땅은 저기 랭게 나오네 조 니차되기요 직디 아니 표에 간용 세야디 되게 개체슈다 내가 지슈들이 셴바디다 미망 되던 다이즈리 그래서 뭐 용가샤르 레든 지조디 아니 간용 넘어서다 레지소 상물로 투몽도 하네 누가 영웅체체 내라샤고 해야 기다나식 점리 셴바기 지수다 지고시게 하제 신슈에
The cabinet can introduce bills and motions and participate in deliberations, but has no right to vote. Finally, the Supreme Justice Commission functions as an arbitration court within the parameters of Indian law, handling civil and administrative cases.
제도 팀시강게 단다 와라 샤몰라 단다 팀시바 고르주 팀시바 체 아니 산이 팀시 강라니 예레 아니 산이 팀시 강라 단다 다대차라 산이 팀시 강 숨차도 제도 팀시 강라 네 쳔바도 니 팀데 쳔바다 진경 쳔바다니 니
The three independent bodies of election, audit, and public service commissions ensure fair elections, fiscal accountability, and procedural transparency. The parliament, known as the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile, meets twice a year in March and in September, and is responsible for the accountability of the administration on political matters and social welfare. The Parliament also ratifies policies and has the power to impeach the heads of the independent bodies, the Justice Commissioners, and the Cabinet. Apart from the business inside the House, the Tibetan Parliament also advocates for the cause of Tibet around the world, visiting and receiving parliamentarians from various governments, and organizing conferences such as the World Parliamentarians Convention on Tibet.
A Syrian-Armenian poet said,
The parliament members regularly visit the Tibetan settlements and bring public grievances and suggestions to the notice of the administration. When Parliament is not in session, the 11-member Standing Committee meets twice a week to deliberate on day-to-day issues. The Public Accounts Committee, Budget Estimates Committee, and other special committees are constituted from time to time.
팀지 시송기 베메 투드 용네 자대 창야레 레군말라 데체베 바게 카투레 카투레 티게 상말로 지두 귤레네 아니 데베트나 고고요레 카투나 고고요레 디 시송기 다 자갈 내상 계급 자갈기 나로리아 아니 자가투소 카투소베이네 아니 베든 슈도 길링구디 귤레ik 토네 난 고고요레 디네 아니 디 첼리아다 산에 투소 카디 지두기 태가르 땅징월을 유두 산에 투소 카게 렌동 칸라 아니 직 투십기 토네 레베니 고기 람든 퓨고에 디게디 귤레ik 토네 투스 퓨고요레
The Secretariat, headed by the Secretary General and the staff, carry out all administrative functions, including documentation and dissemination of parliamentary procedure under the guidance of the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker. Members of the Parliament are elected by a system that is designed to fit the unique situation of a government operating outside of the country it represents. Members of Parliament are not elected based on regional populations such as in a federal democracy, nor on a party affiliation in a system of proportional representation, since the Tibetan government has no political parties. In the Tibetan government system, the three main Tibetan provinces are represented by the same number of members, irrespective of the size of the population of these provinces, in a system that is similar to the way that the United States senators are elected to the Senate. Every 5 years, general elections are held for the members of parliament and the Sikyong in one day all over the world, except inside Tibet. Lay and the ordained Tibetans in India, Nepal, and Bhutan collectively elect 10 members from each of the 3 traditional provinces in Tibet, Uzang, Kham, and Amdo. In addition to voting on their provincial representatives, the Tibetan clergy are allowed to elect 10 more members, 2 from each of the 5 religious traditions: Nyingma, Kagyu, Sakya, Geluk, and Pön. Tibetans in North America elect 2 members, so do Tibetans in Europe. 1 representative is elected from Australasia. A fairly recent development is for the members of parliament to be given the responsibility of earmarked territories in exile, so they can look after the interests of those constituencies. Thus, a member of parliament who is elected by the people from central Tibet, for example, can also look after the interests of Tibetans who are living in an area of South India, regardless of the Tibetan region that the member of parliament is from. Over the decades, His Holiness the Dalai Lama increased the amount of responsibility that he gave to the elected Tibetan leadership. And since the first democratically elected Kalan Tripa, or the Prime Minister, in the year 2001, His Holiness the Dalai Lama had described himself as being in a semi-retirement from Tibetan political affairs. Gradually, His Holiness the Dalai Lama announced the devolution of his political role and his complete retirement from political life. On March 11, 2011, His Holiness issued a statement addressed to the Tibetan Parliament, informing his decision to devolve the political authority to the elected leaders and advised to make necessary changes in the charter to relieve him of his political authority. The 14th Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile unanimously approved in its session to plea His Holiness the Dalai Lama to continue holding his political authority. A number of petitions and requests were put forward by the Tibetans both inside and outside Tibet, including an appeal from the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile requesting His Holiness to continue his role as the political leader of the Tibetan people. But His Holiness declined and clarified his stance during a public teaching on March 19th.
군진 나와 로산 자주 겁네 경왕기 벼추시니기 우치 나야데 차바래 땅나 경왕압에 견진 주시부 차대기요래 다 경왕기 견진 주시부 차대요래 저 딘제인데 경왕 군진 지기 다 당도랑 가시 조신 법에터네 경왕기 벽 추시니기 우치 세야데 둡소점나 신도 해버려 미수찌기 셔터야 요말 띵내 타제토 그래 내 타제비 다 벽이 첩시기 랭겐디 망주터네 위두체베 구치기 완전 쌍막히는 줘야지 마도 내대 지금 그게 간다 이제나 여름치야 무튼이 지금 첩시기 구치 임베 남바데 레다나 지금 슈구직 하대가 서로 차이. 뒤당 내봐도 주주 당거래. 주주 당야 뒤에 안 들레베 서스도. 다 뒤에인데 딘데가 타네 메만 그 감을 챤이 여대베 달라라면 디커도 때다 룩니기 우치레사게 추시니기 우치레사데 다 참샤샤나 베 시지 데베타네. 다 나도 남주 손도도 사베 거돌이야. 손도 저서 손도 슈그르 때 손도 개강 안에 저린 쓰도와 어다 뒤는 시체니 경험하네 마 추시니기 우치 전에 다 로시비 하서 심버디 다 개강 안에 잠샤 중나 시지르바.
His Holiness made it clear that although he was relieving himself from any direct political involvement as relating to the laws and legislation of the Tibetan government in exile, as the Dalai Lama, he would continue to serve as an active spokesperson for the Tibetan cause.
나 강점배 유미차대요래. 강점배 사야주 pimi chigun namde yongzo lo la pyo jibe todage gen tide ya. So nga chashane pyo chigun namdengi mi jechik chade domen amdu yunu yombe pebashi chade kanjibu chade nga mashibudu gende yeberwa.
Constitution 좀 쳐. 아니 배도 배미 응건쇼다. 아니 배미 ngо다. 지진 천지. 근데 이마인데 배낭 맞아. 고던 기반하기 ndam heba teyo logic shungrapre region 배미 응건데 젤 도바인데 아니 가서 chating tenzen tombi nolola. 아니 tenzen 숨치 산주슈레. tenzen tom보데 배미 데데 섬시 여자당 최도 리요. 리네지 손쇼 답변당 백이 짜된 도도진 첸 아니 배미당 배미 진주길 레된 공지 토라 갈로 람된당 그자 난죠 아니 텐젠 님바데 constitution 좀 초기 개간 남지 겁다 아니 고치 남게 손데 남힐라 배지 짜된 도도진 첸비 아니 레된 계지 토라 배미 진주도 아니 배미 모기 체도 아니 저조도 가샤게 gombi chegir gonja nojo tenzo sombade pemi jinzu da pemi mongi chedo jashi uti namba ne daga no yinge ne menaka jante kodur da ne kasha ge konzu shebe kotob tenje da mese kozo nola konza shonge chimo choke kotob jin sene zajo tension ne azo tenzo sum de sanjo hyotoba shongere ne azo shilo nyedon kyujiki 신당 아비기 tenye 자군에 잔진 라더 히어레 ane constitution 좀 초게 다 거바 존재 도말 지네 모두 수전노 나힌게 먼저 뱀이 양지 모두 탑단다 경구르닌가 야마라베 토네 론스 쳇톱가야 돼 개첨 차대래.
The 14th Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile decided to form a charter review committee. Consequently, the Second Tibetan National General Meeting was convened from 21st to 24th May 2011. The meeting discussed the amendment of His Holiness's political authority in the Charter and decided to plea His Holiness to at least continue holding political authority in a ceremonial capacity. The 14th Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile convened an additional parliament session to make the 25th Charter Amendment to transfer all political authorities of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the leaders directly elected by the Tibetan people and the democratically elected leadership. On 29th May, His Holiness the Dalai Lama signed the document formally transferring his temporal authority to the democratically elected leaders. The Parliament approved the change of name Tibetan Government-in-Exile to Central Tibetan Administration and the motto on the official emblem Gande Poda Chole Namgel to Demba Ni Number Gelgyurjik. With the amendments in the Charter, Kalun Tripa will approve and promulgate the bills and regulations passed by the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile. Likewise, the Kalun Tripa will appoint not more than 7 Kaluns for his or her cabinet to be approved by the Parliament. Oath of office administered by His Holiness the Dalai Lama was to be commissioned by the Chief Justice Commissioner of the Tibetan Supreme Justice Commission. Convention of biannual parliamentary sessions and additional sessions summoned by His Holiness the Dalai Lama was to be summoned by the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile. Similarly, as per the need, the Kashak, the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker of the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile may call a special general meeting of Tibetan public, which was previously done by His Holiness. The Chief Justice Commissioner, other 2 Justice Commissioners of the Tibetan Supreme Justice Commission, and heads of the autonomous bodies appointed by His Holiness the Dalai Lama was to be voted by the Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile. If the requisite quorum is not met, the Speaker and the Deputy Speaker can postpone the parliamentary session for more than 7 days, which was previously done in consultation with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The outcome of popular referendum initiated through the Central Tibetan Election Commission has to be signed and announced by the Sikyong, which was earlier done by His Holiness the Dalai Lama. The 15th Tibetan Parliament-in-Exile amended the official title of Kalun Tripa to Sikyong Political Leader and the strength of the members of parliament was increased to 45. Dr. Lobsang Sengye became the first Sikyong of the Central Tibetan administration after the Charter Amendment on the 8th of August 2011 and served as the Sikyong for 2 consecutive terms from the year 2011 to 2016 and the year 2016 to 2021 for the 14th and the 15th Kashak. On 27th May 2021, Pemba Tsering, the current Sikyong of the Central Tibetan administration, was sworn in as the Sikyong of the 16th Kashak by the Tibetan Supreme Justice Commissioner. The transfer of all political authorities of His Holiness the Dalai Lama to the leaders directly elected by the Tibetan people vests in them the competence to represent all Tibetans in Tibet and in exile, and to fulfill their public service. When the opportunity arises, the present government will dissolve and a new one will be formed with the participation of Tibetans from both inside and outside Tibet.
더